we look at medicine, we look at the body, we look at everything a certain way. And it's just my opinion here, but I don't believe it works. So I lived the fact that it didn't work in 26 doctors in 5 years. So as I got well, I never knew I was going to become a practitioner. I never knew I was going to do any of this. I just wanted to get well. And in my particular case, and I loved the guy that you sent me the link of this morning who talked about the fungal root, the fungal etiology to everything, because I was led to that. And, Professor, the Professor Seafried guy, all these people, they're brilliant. They're brilliant on metabolic health, and everybody talks about those things. In fact, the plethora right now all across social media of good doctors talking about basically it's all metabolic. Everything's metabolic, and it's all about the insulin spikes, and it's all about getting your insulin down, which I totally agree with. I'm there for it. I'm like, yeah, diet really counts. But guess what else grew for years with your insulin spikes? Guess what else is at a tissue level, a hormone level? What else has grown exponentially in your body through all those years, and then being on antibiotics and having no biome, so you don't even have any probiotics? Guess what else grew? And that's called fungal overgrowth. So
episode 33, and today we're joined by Wendy McPhail from Never Springs. In this interview, we discuss a lot around pathological fungi, Candida, yeast infections. She has extensive experience healing herself, actually, and many others, getting to the root cause of these issues. We discuss ozone therapy, we discuss the importance of magnesium, and also we discuss colon hydrotherapy, coffee enemas, and colonics, and the importance of having a flush out. And we go into great detail about that. So, as always, please like, share, and subscribe. And I really hope that there's a lot of value in this podcast. I personally believe there is. I think Wendy's absolutely onto something here. She's also sort of touched on some of the work that Mark Linton's doing at the moment with his new theory on cancer. And she covers this very well in this interview, actually. So I hope you enjoy, and I'll see you on the other side.
I was put on antibiotics from probably 5 years old. I was given the polio vaccine at 5.5 years old, and I got polio. So I ended up in the hospital in a body cast, back in those days. So the only reason I tell you that story is just years and years of antibiotics, and it's going to be the foundation of what I'm going to talk about and why I was so sick. So when I was hitting about my mid-20s, it all kind of started. I think I had a really bad car accident. No blood, but just really ill. And then everything progressed. So before I even tell you what I teach now, I lived through what I talk about, what I teach. So every single thing I talk about, detoxifying the body, dealing with cancer, dealing with autoimmune disorders, and diet. First, I lived it all. So I came through the 80s and 90s where there was no internet, anybody out there. So we didn't have it. We didn't have what you guys have. We couldn't go on there. And people go, yeah, but, there's bad information too. But we didn't have any. It was nothing. And so, if you had, in America here, if you have a good medical plan, that's actually the problem. So, I had such a good medical plan, I could see 26 doctors in 5 years and be on 5 prescription drugs and, trying to follow what they all thought it was. But because of the way of looking at health, I'm probably in all of North America. I was raised in Canada, so I was a Canadian by birth. It's and I was watching some of your other podcasts, so other people have talked about this. We look at medicine, we look at the body, we look at everything a certain way. And it's just my opinion here, but I don't believe it works. So I lived the fact that it didn't work in 26 doctors in 5 years. So as I got well, I never knew I was going to become a practitioner. I never knew I was going to do any of this. I just wanted to get well. And in my particular case, and I loved the guy that you sent me the link of this morning who talked about the fungal root, the fungal etiology to everything, because I was led to that. And Professor, the Professor Seafried guy, all these people, they're brilliant. They're brilliant on metabolic health, and everybody talks about those things. In fact, the plethora right now all across social media of good doctors talking about basically it's all metabolic, everything's metabolic and it's all about the insulin spikes and it's all about getting your insulin down, which I totally agree with. I'm there for it. I'm like, yeah, diet really counts. But guess what else grew for years with your insulin spikes? Guess what else is at a tissue level, a hormone level? What else has grown exponentially in your body through all those years, and then being on antibiotics and having no biome, so you don't even have any probiotics? Guess what else grew? And that's called fungal overgrowth. So this is where everything started for me, and I'm really glad I did not have the internet. I'm really glad I did not have what everyone has today, because that was my foundation, and that's where I began. And I want to just give a little plug here for Ozone, and I know we're going to get into this more in a bit, but for some people who are super compromised like I was, so there are people whose body, you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, you take a whole bunch of supplements, you start going to the gym, you lose some weight, things change for you. I wasn't that somebody. Okay, I had fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, lupus, MS, and then they told me I had breast cancer, and on top of it, I carried the gene for breast cancer. So they were like, oh, no, it's just inevitable. You're going to die. So all of this is hitting me. I'm in a miserable marriage. My whole life is a mess, okay? So if I look back now, I say there was a foundation, and the foundation was that fungal overgrowth that all started. And that's what I've kept, and I do believe it's the root of all cancers. I believe that it's a big part of cancers. I think there was many doctors in the 90s that are not heard of now who wrote books. There was 3 of them in Europe, and I have their names here at some point. I can give them to you, but they wrote a lot of books about the fungal etiology of all cancers, all kinds of them, not just one cancer. And so I stumbled upon info, and in the early years, like early 2000s, we were doing dial-up internet, and I found people in Canada. I found people all over on the internet, and this was the one theme I kept coming back to, but I didn't have any other info. And then I stumbled upon doctors. There was a doctor in the 70s, man. This man changed my life, and I found his book. I think he might have even been passed away by the time I found the book, and the book is out of print. But on Twitter, I always put the book title up. And it was called The Missing Diagnosis, and it was Orion C. Truss, Truss. And Orion Truss went to the sanitariums in New York where schizophrenic people were left to die basically on drugs. And in the center of that book, he goes through, I'm sorry, I wasn't ready for this, so that's going to end, that noise.
That's all right. That's fine. There we go.
So anyway, he went to the sanitarium, and what he did is he went to the sickest people, went to the doctors, went to the nurses, and said, I want 4 or 5 of your sickest people. The ones that are on meds forever, they all got schizophrenic, they're going to die. And he took them and he put them on antifungal diets. And in those days, there was different antifungals they used in the 70s, but one of them was nystatin. I think nystatin is still around now. Anyway, he put these people on it, the whole story of them and how they all got well. Only one of the 5 ended up back in the sanitarium because they went back to bread and the diet. And the consistency I kept seeing in there, was lots of bread, lots of pasta, lots of bread was the big one. And then their colons weren't moving. And I wasn't even a colon therapist yet. And I'm reading this going, oh my goodness, look at this. All these sick people, nobody's pooping. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but it was like this big thing that just blared in my head. And I thought, isn't that kind of amazing? So you got to remember, this is 30 years ago. And my big joke when I teach and I speak in my area is, hey, I started at the bottom. And the bottom to start at is the colon. The bottom to start at is poop. Everything about your poop is everything. So whenever you hear that, those people are right. So I didn't know about colonics. I didn't know anything. So anyway, going back to me, there are people who don't get pulled up by their bootstraps, who don't get better. They do it all. I did it all. I saw many doctors, alternative doctors and MD doctors. I tried everything. I wasn't getting well. And then when I tried to take anything, any supplement, anything by mouth, I would get so violently ill that I couldn't take anything. So even the alternative naturopathic doctors would be like, we can't help you. We can't help you because we can't do anything with you. Like, this is how bad I was. And I was in bed most of every day. Anyway, that's the beauty of Ozone. So I have these major topics I always talk about. But for those people who are super sick, for those people who no one can help you, for those people whose liver are so congested and so problematic, maybe both your pathways aren't working, Ozone is your friend. And Ozone bypasses all of it And the big thing, if you watch, you were talking about Dave Asprey, I follow him as well. And he's done a number of interviews with Dr. Frank Schellenberger. And Dr. Frank Schellenberger in America, anyway, is the top ozone doctor. And I was actually, I went to his seminars where I first got certified in how to even use ozone. And he actually wanted to hire me as his colon therapist over there in Carson City, Nevada. And it's just that the timing was really bad. And my last two kids were graduating high school. But great guy. But the reason I bring this up to you is the mitochondria. So in your other, I was able to scan some of your podcasts, a lot of people talking about cancers, a lot of people talking about being sick. We all know it goes back to the mitochondria. Everybody does. And then you're going to talk to people that get really complicated, all about the metabolics. But in a really practical methodology of life, how would you say to somebody, oh, look at, you're sick at a mitochondrial level. This is what you should do. I mean,
yeah.
Hello. And besides, you're an individual. So here's the thing that was, and now after 22 years of working with people, I can tell you it's absolute truth. Ozone works with everybody. Everybody.
Really?
And it gets to the mitochondrial level of the body. And if you can't take pills, and if you can't take anything all these people want you to do because you are that sick, ozone, O3. So ozone's not oxygen. Everybody goes, oh, you mean hyperbaric? No. O3 is O2, which is oxygen. And you add one more atom, which makes O3. And now it becomes activated oxygen. And now it's antiviral, antibacterial, and antiparasitical. Anyway, I'm all over the place, so bring me back in. You can ask me questions.
Well, I was gonna touch on exactly how you use ozone a little bit later. Sorry, ozone a little bit later.
No problem.
But I wanted to ask you, what is it that you think originally caused your bacterial and fungal overgrowth, and what do you think causes it in most people? You mentioned antibiotics. I'm presuming that maybe propelled the situation, but do you think the original cause?
Yes. So I do a lot. I have a YouTube channel where I talk about this a lot. I try to write on it a lot because, you know, anybody can say to me, we're all individuals, we're all different. We are, but then we are not, because there's basic principles to health, and there's principles to the body that are the same with everyone. That, you know, that's unchanging. So for some people, in my case, I came up in the antibiotic generation. I came up at a time where it was given to you for absolutely everything. If you had acne, you went on antibiotics. If anything you had, you know, and the doctors would just put them in your hand, like here, take some of these. We didn't even have to go even get, you know, a prescription. So yes, in my case, it was definitely a lot of antibiotics from when I was about 5 years old. And if you understand what they do, the word antibiotic means anti-life. The word
What's the opposite of pro, right? The opposite of probiotics.
Yeah. So antibiotic is all life is wiped out. That means all of everything in you, not just, you know, the bad stuff that you're trying to kill. You're killing everything. Okay, if you combine that with many of my clients, maybe these young girls are put on the pill at 10 and 12 years old, which is all the time. Let me tell you, this time we're living in, I am always I'm always mortified. These children are being put on the pill at 8, 9, 10. So do I believe that the pill and certain other drugs like steroids and breathers and inhalers can almost do the same thing as antibiotics that happened to me because I'm older than them? Yes. So you say, what is a causative factor? I loved, what's this man's name this morning? The man that you gave, I'm going to give a plug for your podcast you did with him. What was the man with the fungus?
Mark.
Yeah. Everybody should watch him. Everybody should watch your podcast there because he's nailing it over and over again. And again, you're always going to, with the big name doctors, they're all over X, you know, Twitter, they're all over everything. You're always going to find, they're not evil. They're all getting woke up. They're all going to talk about metabolic. They're going to talk about carnivore. But we need to come back to the gut. And you're saying this to me. This is the missing diagnosis. This was that book by Orion Truss, this Dr. Truss, you know. He saw this in the 70s and he was such an outlier. He was such an outsider. And it took years until I think the late 80s where Dr. Crook came out with, you know, the Yeast Connection book. And that was major years later. So you're asking me, what is it? What? I believe that even though your first cause of illness may not be fungal, let's say you have gluten intolerance, and because of being gluten intolerant, you've got inflammation in your gut. How many years went by before you knew you were gluten intolerant? Maybe you had the problem for years. So what happened in your gut was you became inflammatory, and you probably got leaky gut syndrome, and then you had all this inflammation happening. Now, we all have yeast, we all have fungal overgrowth, or not overgrowth, but we have some when we're born. So we get this inflammation. This can be anything with anyone. You get the inflammation that starts you off. And now that fungus really starts to get in there. And now it starts to grow. In my case, it was antibiotics because they wiped out absolutely everything. I had no biome, and fungus is always present. But because they make biofilms and they colonize, they will literally make a matrix that they live in. They don't sit out in the open, so you just kill them. And so they get in the tissues, and there's many, many books from the 80s where, especially Dr. Remington, if people can find his books, he really got into how the estrogen, that the yeast will literally get on the receptors and create their own counterfeit receptors. So they're turning it. You think you have, even with breast cancer, they go, oh, this is an estrogen-driven thing. We got to put you on a hormone blocker. Well, did you know that the fungal root to that cancer is fungus? And the problem with the fungus is that they literally will take receptors and steal every little bit of your estrogen. So it looks like this is estrogen driven, and it's fungus driven. And you can look at this on every single cancer. And I know this is a lot of info. When I talk to people, I always try to, like with my clients, I have to start, my Spanish speaking, poquito, just go poquito, go slow. Because you have to get down to that fungal part. And there's so many great doctors. Dr. Fung, who wrote all those books, Dr. Sean Baker on there, Dr. Ken Berry, all these huge doctors, and they miss this. And all the new functional medicine's huge. We have all these doctors now becoming, functional doctors, and we're all like, this is amazing. What do they miss? What are we going to go back to? Your question was, what begins it? I am convinced it's this. And here's the thing. You could say, well, that's just you. It's your story. And it did heal me. And it's amazing. And then adding ozone put me, I was riding around the whole country on my motorcycle for 5 years, just living the life, I was supposed to be dead twice. And so ozone is the finishing touch. But here's the thing. If you start with a messed up biome as a child, and most people do now, this time we're living in, it's everyone. Let's just say it's only from taking, I won't say them, but you know what those are. So that starts as a child.
Yeah.
Where is it starting with people? So you really always have to go back to that biome, and always remember your first cause. If it's that gluten intolerance, it can be your first cause. But what will happen with the fungal overgrowth is it sends out so many endotoxins, which are over 178, that the first cause of your disorder, my first cause wasn't fungal. It was probably the fact that I grew up on milk. I never got nursed. I had antibiotics as a baby. So boom, there I was hit. Now the fungus comes in, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully this is making sense, because that's the bottom issue.
No, it is to me. One of the things you said about, when you're a child and get one of them, when you look at like the adjuvants in these, and where do they end up? They end up in the gut. They end up piercing holes in the gut, especially if you've got things like mercury and all of this. So essentially, through various you're taking antibiotics, you're destroying your microbiome.
Yes.
And then you've got these chemicals and all of these heavy metals and things like mycotoxins from moldy food or living in a moldy house or whatever.
Yep.
And it ends up in the gut, and then it, as you say, it's like an opportunistic fungal growth, which essentially you're giving it a food source as well. And especially most people are eating sugar, and you mentioned dairy. I'm on the fence with dairy. I eat a lot of dairy, I'm going to be honest, especially raw dairy.
Well,
so
again,
I'm sort
you have to go back to your gut on the dairy. If you've got an intact gut, you're fine. If it's raw dairy, all the better, but some people can't.
Yeah, some people, no chance. But with, where was I going with this? With these carnivores or even vegans or whatever the diet of the day is that they get into, unless it's actively healing your gut and sealing your gut, like for instance the GAPS diet.
True.
So something like the GAPS diet, for instance. We had Dr. Natasha McBride on the show. She's amazing. So unless you're doing something which is actively healing and sealing the gut, all you're doing, in my opinion, is you're eating certain foods which manage the symptoms, but you're not actually fixing the problem. So if you're carnivore for like 2 years and you're on holiday and you think, I'll have a bit of bread, and it causes you chaos, you've not fixed yourself. So all you're doing is avoiding the actual problem, which is that's where I got to. I went carnivore for a few years, and my health was great, my fitness was great, but I think I lost a load of weight. I almost got too lean. I was a bit worried. I was like, I don't look right. I look like a child. And then the other thing with it, because you're burning so much fat in your body, you're kicking up a load more toxins.
Right.
So that was another thing. So I noticed that health problems started to come off the back of being keto for a long period of time. And I think a lot of people have the same issues. So it just becomes this kind of merry-go-round. And until you're looking at, I think, what you're talking about,
right,
this is where I think the truth is. This is the key.
Yes.
And as you know, and what I like about what you're saying is it is all individual.
It is.
You know, so
it's individual, but there's principles, and those principles never change. For instance, I had a client once who said, well, we're all individuals, and I like to do an intuitive diet. I said, really, what's that? Well, I've been eating chocolate for 2 weeks, because I intuitively feel that I need chocolate. So you have to have, like you're saying, there's certain foods that are good for the body, so I have so many carnivore and so many keto people, and they get to a point, they lose a lot of weight, which was usually their initial goal. It's great. And for most of the diet, it's a good diet. It's if we go back to, I'm a West NA Price chapter leader, so I always tell people we really want to go back to traditional foods as much as we can do them. We want to, this is important information. But if you're coming to losing the weight with a gut that's, full of H. pylori, blastocystis, many drugs, I do lab testing, so I tell people all the time, when you change your diet, you might initially feel so much better because you're not obviously having all the starches, you're not having the sugars. Those things are going to right away make you feel better. But much of the overgrowth of different pathogenic bugs, they just go a little bit latent. They're not dead. You haven't killed them. You're not maybe feeding them. You're not causing, like with H. pylori, people will say, oh, it's only when I have, the red pepper. And I'm like, well, there might be something behind the fact that it stirs that up. So H. pylori is in 1 of 2 people worldwide, not even just nationwide. We're talking 50% of the world, easy, probably higher. Now, some people are just carriers. Maybe they're not symptomatic, but this is a big deal. So you got nonstop heartburn. You've got all these problems going on, and then they're on this diet, and about 6 months into carnivore, they're like, I don't know, man, like I just keep getting this thing here, and I keep having these cravings for sugar, and then when I get on it, I'm on 3 days, I can't get off sugar, they're like this. I'm telling every day on my Twitter account, I'm going, if you've done this diet, please go deeper, right? And there's great tests now. There's a GI map test through Diagnostic Solutions Lab, and it's not probably going to be on your protocol, and you can get it in Europe, you can get them anywhere. And 97%, 94 to 97% accuracy was unheard of. When I was first testing 15 years ago with people, especially for H. pylori, they tell you 54% accuracy.
Is that through like a stool test? Yeah.
Oh yeah, the GI map test will also tell you something called a virulence factor. So there's 8 factors. And if you come up positive for H. pylori and then you have 1 or more of these virulence factors, your chances of having esophageal or stomach cancer goes through the roof. Because when you did your carnivore diet, that didn't kill your H. pylori, right? Now, the other subjects is what you said. You were losing too much weight and there's other issues. But speaking only of the biome, changing the diet alone does not fix everything.
Yeah,
that's a big,
especially if you've got these you've got these giant like biofilms in your gut. You're not going to digest in the food correctly. You're not going to be moving waste out properly as well. So I think, and then you start getting into the whole thing with like parasites as well, which is a whole. When someone says, intuitively, I felt like I wanted chocolate. It's like, what is there not something maybe that's living in there that's, I'm quite into the idea that we live in like a simulated reality. So it's almost like something's kind of hijacking the information field that's
and that's
giving
a good
you.
point. Really good point.
It's
Really
crazy
good
when you
point.
look into it and you think, are we in a simulation or something? Because this is weird. It's like sci-fi.
Yeah. Well, you have to understand that bugs, and especially yeast, I mean, yeast is famous for this. It really changes your brain structure. So you're thinking you need chocolate, but those endotoxins in that thing growing in you is going, chocolate. Just get out there and get some chocolate. So in some aspects, if people aren't educated, which is why I feel like I'm a voice in the wilderness on this constantly, is I tell people all the time, you're going to stick those hormone creams on your body. You're going to be doing all these things thinking this is what you're needing. But your problem is this problem. And so they're not getting to root cause. And many times, especially for women in the endocrine systems, it all becomes very complicated because fungal will take right over the endocrine system in women. And women end up with hysterectomies and so many problems, fibroids, so many. If they're young enough, they're having all these menstrual problems, and they're telling me about this terrible pain, and I'm telling them, I take out these old books from 20 years ago. Go read this book. Read about the yeast syndrome. Read about, all of these things that were taught that are now dropped. I feel like an old lady. I'm telling everybody, what happened here? I don't know what happened. We had amazing 80s and 90s. We had all this research. I mean, there was a guy, Doug Kaufman, in America, who even had a TV show called Know the Cause. And the only thing he did was talk about the fungal overgrowth. And he wrote this fat book. And they took children with leukemia who had their heads shaved because of leukemia. I mean, they're in these hospitals, and they came in and they changed their diet, started giving them natural antifungals, and the cancer went away. I mean, it's all documented. This is documented. Doug Kaufman's book is called The Germ That Causes Cancer, GERM. You can still buy it. Everyone should get that book. The mycotoxins in food. We were talking, if you heard my interview with Carl Lenore, I mean, where's the mycotoxins? This is why I tell people don't eat grains. They're like, grains are...
coffee. Whenever I hear about coffee, I'm like, no. It's like the only thing I do. It's the only thing that I do that I allow myself to like really enjoy.
Hey, doesn't Dave Asprey sell coffee that's been checked for mold? That's what I thought.
You can. It's expensive. I don't know. Maybe I'm being tight. Maybe I should spend the money, but it's becoming a thing. People are really, really starting to look into this now. So
here's the thing.
Hopefully, the more people know about it, the more people are onto it, and that should hopefully drive price down a little bit. But
it's
worth the money, I think.
If I can get well from 4 autoimmune disorders, and if I can get well from breast cancer, if I can be 65, getting older, not on drugs, and completely well, and if I can spend 22 years working with clientele, and my whole base, a lot of times I don't even teach them this till later because they're not ready to even understand it. But if that whole base, yes, diet matters, yes, lots of things matter. But if you bring it back to that one base, and all these people with myriads of different things and all kinds of different problems and different autoimmune disorders, if they start going with this one base and this one subject base, and as they do that, they get well, tell me about how this can be wrong. It doesn't cost you money. You can do most of it yourself at home. The best way to know is to start doing antifungals and eating an antifungal diet. In my case, I had to do colonics. I had to do liver flushes. I had to do so many adjunctive therapies because my body had shut down. I had 20 years of being ill. My colon wasn't working right. My liver wasn't working right. I was told I was going to die. When I had breast cancer, they said your lymphs are all plugged up. I didn't want to do chemo radiation. I did not do it. If I was able to get well, doing base with my base being the fungal base etiology, then bringing in ozone, which put me in another stratosphere completely because it went to the mitochondrial level. If I can do this, and I'm nobody, I'm not Natasha McBride. I'm not these people. Who am I? I'm not an MD. I've done a lot of alternative things and I'm certified in lots of things, but most of the things I'm certified in, they wouldn't care about me. How is it possible I'm well? And how is it possible that in the place that I live over 22 years, the reputation I have amongst all these local people, it all works. How is this possible? It should not be working, right?
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah. You know, so, okay, let me think about this. So with the fungal situation, so I'm with you on this. I totally see it and I agree, right? But the issue I think that people may have following this is, okay, so if this is the base of everything, like what are the early signs? What are the early symptoms? Because a lot of it can go undetected, or a lot of it can just be normal, right? You go to a doctor, they say, it's normal. You're getting old. Yeah.
Well,
but then you from there,
else.
You go from there to it being this. It's possibly as my the guy I had on, Mark Linton, says, it's the base of pretty much all cancers. So it's like you've got this scope from here, farting a couple of times a day, with maybe a fungal infection in the toe or something, I don't know, or a bit of white coating on the tongue. These things most people wouldn't even know they've got them. And then you've got death, and it's like, whoa. So how can we sort of go into what do you see, like, that would tell, what are like the checkpoints that you follow minus the testing, let's say, because maybe not everyone's going to go and get tested, like what are kind of the hallmarks that you see that are maybe the early signs, and then maybe going a bit further, look, this is now becoming a problem that you need to look at, and then obviously going to the next level, which is, okay, you're in the doctor's office, there's a serious problem right now. We're talking about a complete variation of situations, but it is the same thing that would potentially just get worse and worse and worse and lead to more and more problems. Well, does that make sense? There's a bit of it.
Okay, we'll start with babies. Babies are born and they have a white coated tongue. If you've never had children, you won't know this. It's called thrush. Ever see thrush on a tongue? So we've got all these layers of how bad fungal overgrowth gets. So we all are born with some, but the whole idea is the balance. You have good bacteria, and then you've got the fungal aspects, but the good bacteria and the body, the immune system, usually keeps it in its parameters. The times we're living in now are exponentially worse than when I grew up. And in my case, we have a lot of antibiotics, but there's way more drugs now. I see people quite regularly on the inhalers with steroids from very young. So you're saying, what are they? What are those symptoms? So, you have you have thrush on the tongue, you have toenail fungus, you have rashes. Lots of skin rashes can be fungal. Most of the dermatitis, psoriasis, itchy scalps, eczemas that I see and I talk with people about. This is how I do it. And because I know to do an antifungal regime doesn't cost people very much money, it's not going to do any damage to your body. It's not, in fact, going to do anything bad. So if I say to a client, look at, you've got really bad skin rashes here. We've got some thrush on your tongue. And if the woman's been on the pill, and I say to her, listen, you can do a test for yeast, but the problem with testing for yeast is everybody has some. So now you've got to test the endotoxins, which are going to be the result of being overgrown with Candida. And those tests are hard to find. You have to learn how to read them. You can get certain tests that all they look for are the residue or the toxins from fungal overgrowth. That's what they're looking for. And then they're going to look also for certain immune system things that they're going to look for. And then you still, at some level, have to go, I'm pretty sure. It's not going to say 100% this is what you have, but this is showing me this way. So this is why a lot of doctors won't test for it. They're basically like, well, everybody has it. I mean, you'd have to have AIDS and be in the final stages to really have a fungal problem. And that's just BS, right? So you've got this stuff as children. Children will quite often, they're always having a sore stomach. And all they tell their parents is all they want to live on is carbs. I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. But they don't want to eat meat. They don't want everything, with saturated fat that would make them feel full. They want to live on sugar and carbs all day. If you add this to today's people, like I said, young people, very young, are on breathers. They got allergic reactions, so they put them on these steroids. In America, they're called corticosteroids. Those will make just your yeast or your normal fungus you're born with, everybody has some, go into the stratosphere. And this child could be 4, 5, 6 years old. And all of a sudden, they have no eyebrows anymore. They have no hair on their arms. And these clients come to me with look at this. What happened? I started asking them right away, were you ever on steroids? You're on breathers? Well, yeah. Oh, you have no hair on your body because it's all been fungally kind of taken over, the spores, right? So steroids, and all of them, by the way, and this would include the gym steroids that guys like to use too to get the muscles. The biggest problem with them is they really feed a little bit of fungus becomes much fungus, right? So we're looking, so you're saying, yeah, but lots of people can do little things in their life, like you could have thrush, but it goes away, and then you have good health, for a while. So there's levels of having some fungal overgrowth. A woman can have a vaginal infection, right? She takes some monostat, she takes something and it goes away. So what is the change that starts there and then you end up over here? And that's where I work with people with adjunctive therapies, and I try to teach people about self-care. And that's when I get into how often are you going to the bathroom? What is your diet like? Women, what are your periods like? And I'm trying to work with them to kind of get to this place of going, if they come to me and they're like, no, they think I have Lyme's, I can't do anything more, I'm laying in bed all the time, I can't do anything. A lot of times I'm not saying they don't have Lyme's, I'm not doing the Lyme testing, but what happens is things become complicated. So they start back here with some thrush, they start having some problems, and then maybe they go on the pill. Or maybe it's a guy and he ends up doing a lot of steroids at the gym, maybe I don't know, maybe he breaks his arm, he's on a lot of pain pills, something happened in there, okay? So things will happen with people, and sometimes with the history, when I'm talking to somebody, I'm trying to find out, okay? Lately, I'm seeing a lot of young women with Lyme's disorder. This is what they're diagnosed with. When I go back to their history, and I start finding out they were on the pill at 13, they had a lot of problems they were given drugs for. So they never could poop, so the doctor gave them a stool softener, and then that isn't really working, but she's still taking it. And then she's depressed. One of the biggest signs of fungal overgrowth, especially for women because of our hormones, is people with a really bad Candida will have severe depressions. I mean, severe. We're talking, oh man, not just schizophrenic and the aspects of that part of the brain, but emotional fragility, and then right into really severe depressions. I mean, I even have a theory about when women are pregnant, and especially if they have many pregnancies in a row, 3 or 4 or 5 pregnancies in a row, you have that progesterone and the hormones are becoming very high right before birth. And then when the woman, usually throughout the pregnancy, she's eating, I don't even know why I want to eat ice cream every day, So they got a lot of fungal, a lot of sugar going on in fungal, and their hormones are high till they have the baby. Then she has the baby and she goes into what's called postpartum depression. And some of it's very severe. And here we have this fungal problem, through this whole pregnancy. She has the baby, her hormones now drop, and she's feeling like terrible. But nobody will talk to her about fungal overgrowth, and no one will talk about what has happened here during this pregnancy. I mean, you shouldn't even have another baby until you have checked, your gut is figured out, and you do some work after being pregnant with the possibility of having a lot of fungal overgrowth. And so here's another problem. You might say to me, but I'm not eating sugar, I'm not eating any of this. And I'll find people where they don't even do all that, and they've got severe fungal overgrowth. So a compromised immune system, I wanted to say this to you earlier, that even on the milk, when you mentioned milk, was some people can eat milk, drink milk, some can't. Some people say, oh, it just has to be raw and then everybody can do it. Not true, right? Plus there's the protein in it. Is it A1 milk? Is it A2 milk? What's happening? So we've got a problem where you could have genetically been born unable to handle milk. So when you're working with people and people are trying to get well, some of this is genetics, right? So I came up as a compromised kid. I already had problems as a young child. So I wasn't healthy with my immune system. So when the stuff that happened to me with the antibiotics and all the things happened, I already had an immune system that wasn't on full working super well. And so if you say, so what's the differences? It's highly individual. But for a lot of people who have been compromised since they were very young, and they've been compromised with their immune system in some way, or maybe they started out on prescription drugs as a kid, these are the ones that, we used to call them the canary in the coal mine, because we're the first ones that were sensitive. Now they're everywhere. Yeah. In my time, they weren't as common. Now they're everywhere, okay? And this is why the GAPS diet works so well. This is before the GAPS diet. There was another lady who wrote a book on, I think it was called the specific carbohydrate diet. She had that, and I read her books way back in the middle of the 90s. This is before Dr. Natasha was out. And so I was trying to do hers, but it didn't work for me. I was like trying to be all careful with certain carbs and then not other carbs. When I was trying to get well in the late 90s, they were pushing alkaline. You got to be alkaline. You got to be alkaline. That's the only way. I mean, think of that.
They're doing that again now. The vegans,
so
vegans are doing that again.
You're imagining indigenous people, 400 years ago, 300 years ago, out there shooting animals to live, and they're asking each other, do you think that we're alkaline enough this week? Wait a minute, did we already have red meat this week? I mean, it's so dumb. The whole thing is so dumb. Like, and I was in that whole mix in the middle 90s. I was trying to be alkaline, and then they'd say things like, well, if you eat meat, spiritually speaking, these are bad vibes. And I'd be like, oh no, I mean, I'm going to have bad vibes because I'm eating meat, and I'm doing wheatgrass, I'm doing all these things, and I got sicker and sicker. And when I added soy, oh my goodness, soy almost killed me. And I don't even say this lightly. So I was the person that by the early 2000s, I said to everybody, I don't care what you're telling me. I walked away from all doctors in 2001, got off 5 prescription drugs, which also killed me. Took me 2 years to get off 2 of them because they were so terrible and hard to get off. And I had to do it myself because nobody helped me. I mean, I'd go back to the doctors and say, listen, I want to get off these drugs, but when I do, I feel like this. And the doctor would say, well, that just means you need it. Take more. And I thought, okay, I got to find a way to get well. And I don't know how to do this, but I can do it one step at a time, right? So I started thinking about diet. And I started thinking, listen, forever and ever, people ate meat. It was the only thing they could live on. So long before the carnivore and the keto stuff now, this would have been 2000, 2001, I started eating meat. I started doing bone broth. This is before the GAPS book, all of it. I just said, I'm going back to what people ate. And I started doing that. And I have to tell you, I was really, really sick. They told me I had Lyme's as well. I was bedridden. Starting with the colonics, starting with the colon was the most magical thing. I know that people are so against it for all kinds of reasons, but because I do lab testing, because I can see that the biome and the good bacteria is not affected at all. In fact, doing colonics and enemas causes your biome to just be rich and thriving, and I can test and prove it. It was one of the first things that started getting me well. I mean, I have to always give it a plug because so many people, again, in this time of the 2024, people are like, no, we don't believe in that anymore. We're into functional. And I'm like, okay, but it is functional because most of these people can't poop. One of the things when you're starting to get well and you're trying to get that biome back in order, and you're trying to get rid of the biofilm, and you're trying to get past the colonization so that you can, get this lining out. And by the way, everybody, I see that lining come out. That comes out through the colonic machine. I can't tell you when. Oh, is it going to happen in one colonic? Probably not. But people will be doing a protocol, maybe an antifungal protocol, and they're doing enemas and colonics, and they will send me pictures of their ropes. It's a literal rope. Now it can be covered with
stringy.
They're stringy ropes, and they're very real. I mean, I don't know if I can show a picture on here. Can I show you a picture? This lady recently came to me, 28 years old, could not have a bowel movement, no matter what. Started working with her antifungally, and she started doing, she changed her diet, she's killing yeast, still couldn't poop. So I gave her a fiber mix that I use, and my fiber is very specific of what, I just tell people it's not grains, because everybody goes, oh, fiber's terrible, it's the worst thing you could do for your body, it's starch, but depending on the type of fiber you use, it can be okay. So I got her on that, and she was on it about, I think 4 or 5 days. And again, remember, she hasn't been able to poop. And then she sends me this picture from her own toilet at her own house. I'm like, people look at this, they go, well, what is that? And I go, well, technically underneath the color that grosses you out, it's mucus. It's basically a matrix and a lining. Now, does your body normally make that lining, and is it normally healthy? Yes. It's called, biofilms are healthy. A healthy biofilm is laid down by the body. It's good. The problem is when we are infested with these things and our diet isn't good and other things happen, and we're especially not going to the bathroom, this lining becomes just like that, very black because it's covered with stool. Now, people really have to understand this. When I'm on X or Twitter and people are all writing about biofilms and this gets a biofilm out and this gets it out and they all go on and on. If you understand that the matrix and the biofilm that these things live in is pretty much a gooey, sticky thing that they and by the way, they're not alone. They live with their friends, right? So you're not usually just going to find yeast. You're going to have other things. Like maybe if we do a lab test, I'll find other parasites, but they live there. So what you're really trying to do is just like a snake sheds a skin, you want your body to let go of this toxic lining because you're not digesting, you're not assimilating your good things. You can't because this is basically blocking it, right? And this is why when people say, I have a neighbor, he said to me one day, because his wife comes to me and he goes, I don't want to be like you and her because then I won't be able to ever eat anything. I said, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, you know, she used to be able to eat everything and now she'll eat something and say, oh, I just don't feel it. I said, right. Because you are eating absolutely everything in the world. You live on seed oils. You live on all this trans fat and crap and sugar, and your body will go numb. So I show him this picture from this girl and I say, so you've got this biofilm, you've got this lining. You're not assimilating anything good anyway, and you're blocked because the lining's there. And now you're saying to me, I can eat anything, Wendy. Nothing bugs me. Of course nothing bugs you because you're blocked, you're numb. By the way, after a while, the body just gets numb. One of the things I've noticed with people, especially if they have cancer, as we're starting to work backwards and people are trying to get well, the first 6 months, I had one lady, it was almost a year. She was taking things and doing stuff, and I kept saying to her, what do you feel like? Oh, I feel great. I feel great. No problems. How many of these you want me to? What should I mean, she was just, it was unbelievable. And I was thinking, man, this is, so she was numb. She had years and years of using prescription drugs, years of being sick. She was only about 35 years old. So about 8 months in, one day she calls me and she's going, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I've been crying all week and I just feel so. I'm like, okay, finally.
Yeah, that's you're literally describing my wife. That's what she was. She used to, out of anyone I've ever met in my life, she could eat the hottest food, chilies like insane, ghost chilies, all of it, and it wouldn't even touch the sides. And I always had a suspicion because this was like before I was into what I'm into now. I always had a suspicion that is not healthy. There's a reason why.
Yep.
But as she's worked on her health for like the last 4 or 5 years, she's now becoming way more sensitive to stuff. But years ago, she'd take something, she'd be like, no, I don't feel nothing. No, nothing. No. Honestly, when you were saying that, I was like, wow, that is, I've experienced that,
Yes.
Whereas now she's becoming way more, and she always says living healthily is horrible because now I feel everything. And she gets sick more often now. She used to never get sick either. Now she gets sick every year like a normal person, which I think for people that don't get sick, maybe it's good health. I tend to lean towards the other side. I think you're so clogged up and so toxic, your body's just storing it. I think it's good to get sick once a year, have a good old clear out. If it's every month, then there's an issue. But people that don't get sick, I'm always a little bit suspicious of.
Right. Well, I always say to my clients, it's not that you got it, it's how long you got it, right? So you get sick, it's over in 3 or 4 days, you feel fine. Yeah. You get sick and you're down for 6 weeks, we got a problem. We got a big problem there. And the other thing about getting sensitive, I want to clarify this for anybody watching. You will become more sensitive, like, hey, I've been eating this thing and I really shouldn't eat that food anyway, and I don't feel good eating it now. But there should be a place where, as you're getting well, you're able to eat all kinds of real food that's been around forever. You know what we're talking about here, not processed food in the store, not all, even the organic boxed foods that so many people buy that's gluten-free, that's all junk. That's not real food. So if we're talking about this person that was all numb And the saddest thing I see about people who maybe they're getting older and they're really numb, you know, haven't looked at their health for 40 or 50 years. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes they're numb, like you said. And then all of a sudden now you got stage 4 cancer. Now, do you have the opportunity to turn that around? I've done this long enough to say no. I mean, it's really sad what I see. But sometimes people's bodies robbing Peter to pay Paul for years and years. And then all of a sudden now you've got a situation where you're really sick and you're trying to turn that around and to get well, and your body systems just can't. They just can't. You're too far gone. And that's always my worry. Like my neighbor, I tell him all the time, I go, you're 72 years old. The problem is you're telling me right now you can eat anything. You can do anything. Okay? Now, he's a dear person. I'm not against him. He's a wonderful man. But my point is he's got a huge belly, you know. He's already had to have a hip replacement. He's already had terrible prostate problems, got all these issues. But he'll tell me, I have no problems. Look at me. I can do anything. You really can't. And your body is so wonderfully made, so amazing, that it will try to save you all the way along until it can't. And when it can't, then this is what happened to me. And I was about 40 years old when everything hit, you know, and I had already spent from 30 to 40 on 5 prescription drugs that I didn't know. By the way, this is embarrassing to tell everybody now. I didn't know they were addicting because nobody told me that, right? You're just going to go on an antidepressant and anti-anxiety. By the way, saying this out loud, anybody watching this, everybody's on anti-anxieties.
Oh, yeah. Steve, can I just ask as well? You mentioned earlier about depression. This
Yes.
causes depression. Does it also cause anxiety? Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask that earlier, so sorry.
Yeah. I always say to people, you know, we know there's a blood-brain barrier, right? I mean, you think about the very fact that we all talk about the gut. Everybody talks about the gut. But they don't imagine that everything going on with the gut directly affects the brain. In fact, most of your serotonin is made in the gut, not in the brain. Like I always give this example to men because men, I have to reach them with a story. Maybe not you, but I always do this. I always say, hey, are you
10 years ago, it would have been me.
I go, are you into craft beer? And the guys are like, yeah, we love beer. We love beer. I say, okay. So if you go down to the place where they're making beer and you see it, because they'll bring you right into the place where they make the beer, right? And they've got these big stainless steel vat. There's a VAT, a vat. And you got the hops in one, and you got the next thing and the next thing. And you know that they're actually fermenting, right? They're fermenting it to make alcohol. So let's talk about your gut. Now, on those vats in those beer making places, they have off-gassing tubes. So when it's fermenting and turning to alcohol, it's going out those tubes. You don't have those tubes. You have a gut that's fermenting everything. And by the way, when you don't digest and your gut's whacked out, all of that turns to fermentation. And what lives and loves fermentation? All bugs, but especially yeast, loves it. They love it. So you live on this, you're fermenting in your gut, you have no off-gassing tubes like that beer, and now your blood vessels are carrying it. And what do you have? You have brain fog. You have brain fog so bad and depression so bad, you can't even focus. And so you go to the doctor. I don't feel good. You know, I'm always depressed. I feel like this. Well, does anybody say, hey, what are you eating? What's your gut like? Are you pooping? What's happening with this person? Could they have non-alcoholic fatty liver disorder? What are we talking? Nobody does it. So they're going to be complicated further, and it gets more complicated because now they're going to be given a drug there. Okay? So you always have to imagine the gut as your source. I believe that if you, let's say you die at 100 years old, naturally speaking, if you keep your GI tract, mouth to anus 30 feet, you keep that working right, your digestion, assimilation, and elimination working properly, you're going to die of old age, you know, taking your feet up into your bed and going to see God. That's basically how I look at it. I'm not going down with any more cancers. I'm not going down with anything else. I figured out what the autoimmune disorders were from. I figured out what all of this is. And we have this generalized term that every health maven says, oh, it all begins in the gut. It all begins in the gut. Everything's the gut. And I was okay, it does. But tell me about how you're going to do that. Because you're going to come up with all sorts of problems.
It's become like a soundbite.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it begins in the guts, become a soundbite, but no one's really talking about why and how. And I'm glad you brought up brain fog. That's going to be my next question, which you've just covered quite well there. I did an interview with Dr. Mark Circus as well.
Oh,
He
I
lives in
love
Brazil.
him. I love him.
Yeah, same thing. He's literally talking about
Yep.
the same thing as you.
Yep. Yep.
Baking soda. You know, you look at why. How does bicarbonate soda work? You know, and you're looking into essentially it. You know, firstly, it's very alkaline, number one. But secondly, what it's doing is it's actually helping to essentially sort of push oxygen around the body.
Yes.
Another thing as well, do you know much about this? So at the moment, a lot of people are talking about like nasal breathing, mouth tape at night, and it helps with production of nitric oxide, which helps to push oxygen to the cell.
Right.
Is that something you've looked into, and do you feel that that could have good results as well in the same process?
You know, anytime you ask me something like that, I'm always going to go backwards, because some people doing that would not do well. And again, this is the beauty where I really love, and I'm going to harp always on O3, which is medical ozone. So not the ozone that surrounds the earth that we breathe and it's bad pollution. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about ozone, O3, which is ozone with oxygen. Now, a person doing that, what you're talking about, and they're putting that on at night and they're trying to do the breathing, if they happen to have sleep apnea and they have a lot of other problems, maybe they've got a lot of gut problems, they may really struggle through that, and it may not work for them. Some people, they do great, okay? But I always want to say, you know, the mitochondria, getting oxygen into your body at a mitochondrial level is like, it's just everything. It's such a big subject. Even just opening this can of worms sort of right now with you is so big, but it's so fundamental, you know, because nobody on our earth today, nobody is getting the oxygen that used to be on the earth. We all know that. Not to mention all their plans to cut out. It's so ridiculous. I mean, I walk around every day going, we're living in a clown world. And I just feel like after a while, I'm the crazy one, because every time you talk about truth, it's just like, but we need oxygen, right? So yes, you can watch Wim Hof, you can learn all the breathing, but I'm saying to people, if you're already super deficient and your body is deeply struggling for oxygen already, like, I don't know how everybody's living, but where I live in Southern California, most of our skies every day are crisscrossed with all, who knows what they're, and they even admitted 2 months ago, they put out an actual article saying, we are putting this, and this into the cloud. They even admitted it. What are we breathing? What are we getting? Okay. So there's many ways to take ozone. I have all the ways that I use. I even have the sauna, so I get it into my body that way. But so yes, could I do those things? Do the breathing, do the nasal breathing? Absolutely. Take some classes, go to certain types of yoga classes. They will work you through the breathing, at least a way to start before you're trying to do it laying in your bed and waking up all night, because you can't. I had this lady yesterday. She goes, Wendy, I have to tell you about this thing. I'm wearing them on my mouth and I'm sleeping at night. And I'm like, are you sleeping? She goes, no, not at all, because it keeps waking me up, but I'm hoping it's going to be better. It's like, so I'm always going to come back to fundamentals with you. I consider the one fundamental organ, well, really the two fundamental organs of the body are going to be the liver and the colon, because they work together. And most people's are not, especially the liver. And most people's liver, even if they don't have fatty liver disorder, is super compromised. Always. It's just the world we're living in. It's just what we're in. And then the colon, I have a video, and I have it on my Twitter page, and I have it on my YouTube channel, where all I do is explain to you the anatomy of the colon. And it's really important that people know that you're anatomically, everything that goes on in the colon goes out through your entire blood system. So all your veins, all your arteries attach to the colon. Your vagus nerve attaches to the colon. All your lymphs, the most lymphs in your body, which your lymphs are in your body are head to toe, but there's a lot of them in the bowel, a lot of lymphs, okay? So we have an organ that is basically the seat of the body. It's the seat of everything, right?
Yeah.
And if you imagine somebody that is not having movements at least once or twice a day, and a lot of women don't, we're notorious for this, and you have matter sitting in the bowel, and all those veins and all the arteries are attached to the bowel, and you imagine that, you know, fecal matter has a lot of bad toxic load in it. It's not even just 1, 2, or 3 things. It's like 60 things that are all part of stool. And that's why after you have a movement, there's a smell, right? Everybody knows. Well, when this is sitting inside your body and your blood vessels are taking it.
Yeah.
And then imagine your lymph system, which is supposed to be taking out the trash. You know, your lymph is basically your trash cans. It's one of the things it does, but it's moving out the toxins. But it can't move out the toxins because the bowels are full. And I want to make a quick point here. It's not always poop in the bowels. And this is what I talk about also on that video. I have people with MS. I have people with every autoimmune disorder. I have people that are on, they will probably be on prescription drugs the rest of their lives. They have to be, they're pretty advanced. Many of these people, their liver's not, you know, both pathways aren't working well. They're not able really to have bile production. So your liver produces bile not only to digest fat and meat, but to make bowel movements. And because it works by supply and demand, it's like a mother nursing her baby. As soon as the baby has a growth spurt, she doesn't have enough milk. But 2 days later, she has enough milk. So you stimulate bile production, your liver's going to start producing more bile. So there are people that can do enemas and colonics and be greatly helped by the fact that we're going to stimulate the liver to make more bile. We're going to help this person, not necessarily just to get poop out. We're trying to stimulate their body's immune system that is really in the bowels, if you understand. So there's people I work with their bowels, with their liver, for this reason, because they can't take capsules, they can't take pills, they can't do things. And it's the most amazing therapies. I try to encourage people to learn more about it because it's just mind-blowing. I've seen miracles. Yeah.
So so the next sort of part of the conversation, I wanted to go down the route of solution, right? So I think you painted a very, very good picture as to, you know, your work and why your work is needed. And knowledge base is great. I mean, I'm listening. I've heard a lot of what you're saying, you know, and I'm with it. But you're adding things that I've never heard. I'm like, you know, it's great. I'm enjoying this. So I wanted to ask sort of 2 questions, but I'm happy to kind of let you just do your thing and run with. Number 1 would be when you're looking at sort of the colonics and also coffee enema. So I'd be interested in hearing you explain both and why you think one's better than the other, or you know whatnot. And then the last one is to go into the ozone therapy. So you said that there's multiple different ways you use it. I have a little machine. It's one that I can make ozone water. I'd like to hear your view on that. Is that any good? Is it a waste of time? And then maybe sort of, you know, just run through that and how you've had success in the past, if that's okay.
Okay. So going back, I just recently said to you, I have a video on the anatomy of the colon. The anatomy of the colon is key to understanding coffee enemas, water enemas, or why we do anything at all. If you don't understand anatomy, you're basically going to just think, okay, she does that enema because she can't poop. She's just going to do it so she can poop. And that's true. I mean, water enemas have been around since the beginning of time. There's a bird called an ibis, and it travels across oceans to different continents. And it's got long flying time. And every time it gets to the next continent, it's got this long beak. It takes the water up from the lake where it goes, and then it puts the water up inside itself and does this over and over and over. And so I tell people, I think that the very first people on the earth, they were like, look at that bird. And, you know, here's the thing. We know that Cleopatra, in her tomb, when they found that tomb in Egypt in the early 1900s, she had a enema bag made from the bulrushes of the Nile River and an actual bag. We know she did enemas. We know that King Henry VIII, who was, story is all over every, you know, streaming service, but he couldn't poop the last 20 years. They had to give him enemas every single day. It's been around forever. So what are we basically doing on the one aspect? Yes, you're just bringing water in to help the bowels release. Why might they not release? Well, people live on crap. People live on, you know, they're constipated. And I always like to remind everybody that flour and water makes glue. And in the 70s, we wallpapered the world, and we used wallpaper glue. We made flour and water. So all your pasta, all your bread, all your cereal, all your stuff you do, it's paste, and it's paste to the bowel. So if you're chronically constipated and you live on bread and you live on pasta, there it is. Anyway, so we have that as a water element. Also in the early days of the 1900s, was used for the flu, just people who had the flu. People who had headaches, migraine headaches. Water enemas are the bomb. You can do so much with that. Okay, even a hangover. I had this lady go, yeah, I was so hungover, I just did a water enema, I feel great. Okay, so then we come to the coffee enemas, and I just did a Substack article last 2 days on coffee enemas and why they are so vitally important. And the historical beginnings that most people know about is Max Gerson, so the Gerson Institute, and he's right not far from me, his institute. And I think it was the last, probably since about the 1950s, that he wrote a book called A Cancer Therapy, and really what it was the way that he wanted the diet to be, and then he would do coffee enemas every day or twice a day, I think it was, with every cancer person. And I heard about him maybe 25 years ago, because that's the only thing I knew about coffee enemas. I'd always say, oh, you mean, Gerson therapy, I know about that, but I didn't know the history. So back in World War I, they had run out of pain meds. And, they were doing amputations, every kind of thing there, and they had the medic area. And so one time the nurse, they had run out of pain meds. She took the coffee from the surgeon and poured it right into the enema bag and gave the person as a pre-op thing. They were supposed to give them enemas anyway, and she put the coffee in there, and the guy had no pain. He had no body pain. And this was already known from water enemas that it removed body pain. But when they did coffee, they were like, whoa, this is unbelievable. So they started using coffee enemas all the time on the field, and that was amazing. And then, Gerson, and then the University of Minnesota, I think, was the first real bona fide study that came up with a big study on it and said, hey, there's these things in coffee, and especially in green coffee, organic green coffee, grown in the shade. I mean, they have all these things they say about it, but it has these palmitates in them. And one's called caweol, the other one's cafestol. And they're just palmitates. They're a type of a thing that's a type of an antioxidant, but it's a type of a thing that's in this green bean. And it does the most amazing thing. And guess what it does? I mean, I know so many people taking glutathione. They're like, oh, the liver makes glutathione, and we don't make glutathione anymore, and I'm sick. So they're spending $200, $300, $400 on glutathione pills that they're taking. And guess what coffee enemas did? They increased the body, the liver, the enzymes that make glutathione were increased 600 to 700%.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But that's unheard of. I don't even know.
Yeah.
I don't even know a supplement that would increase you more than maybe 10%. So this was, by the way, the University of Minnesota proved that this was after one coffee enema. This wasn't a series of them, and you had to build up and do so many. So they were just, this is unbelievable. I mean, glutathione is master for detox. That's everything. So that was one of the things I learned. I started learning about the palmitates, and then we come back to structure. And this is what I was telling you in my YouTube video. I literally show the structure there. Anybody could watch that. You can maybe put a link to it at the bottom of this so people could watch that video. So what I explain is, looking at your own self on your left side lower abdomen, that is the bottom of your colon. It's called the sigmoid. And the sigmoid is right before you come to the rectum, where the stool would be removed. So that sigmoid area is about maybe 6 to 8 inches long. And attached to the back of your sigmoid is a major vein. And it's called the portal or the hepatic vein. And that's from your liver. And so the idea of when you take, you only, all over TikTok, these women they're showing bags of coffee enemas. Like they got this big 8 or 10 cup bag of coffee. I'm like, dude, how are you going to hold that? Like, if you do a water enema, you're just taking water just to poop. So you take the water in, you sit on the toilet, and you release. But the idea of a coffee enema is, because that sigmoid has that portal vein there, you're going to take a couple cups of the coffee in a bag, you take it through the enema, you turn on your left side where the portal vein is attached to the sigmoid, and you lay there and read a book for 15 minutes. So the idea is, you don't want to stimulate peristalsis, which would mean you'd have to sit on the toilet and release bowel. So you only want to take a couple cups because you can hold that. If you take 8 cups of coffee, you're probably going to be stimulated to have a bowel movement. You're going to have to sit up on the toilet. So what I tell everybody, you take a couple cups, you lay on your side. This is all in my video. You lay there, you read a book, you look at your phone, you let that coffee and those palmitates be able to get through that bloodstream. So yes, do you get caffeine? Yeah. People always go, it's the caffeine. It's not. You do get some caffeine. You will feel a little brighter, good. but it's these palmitoids. It's the way that they work, and they stimulate the blood vessels even. And we now know that the blood vessels are all stimulated. The liver is stimulated. The liver is producing more glutathione. The liver it's anti-cancer. It's anti-liver cancer to do coffee enemas because of the effect that it has on it. It's just, I mean, I think like everything that we see online, you're always going to see, you know, you yourself could post some amazing thing on X or Twitter, and then in 2 minutes, all these idiots write a whole bunch of dumb things, and then you're like, why did I even do this? This is just dumb, you know? Like, yeah. I don't even want to tell these people.
They're always the same. The same people. Do you know? Just a really quick sidetrack. So today we've got an election, and we're about, I think, to end up with a left-wing government. Oh. And these very people that I'm talking about, the people that question all this, and they are the ones, and that it's intolerable. But these people, they're the ones that will argue against the things like the chemtrails, which we can see in the sky.
Yeah, every day.
I thought one guy was arguing with me. He works for Monsanto. He was arguing with me on Twitter. This was a while ago, promoting GMO food. Yep. And I'm just thinking, I can't actually believe that we don't all agree that it's wrong. I understand that people might sell it because it's cheaper and it's easier to feed the world. You know, I get all those arguments, but he was genuinely like laughing at me because I was worried about it. Yeah. I'm just like, and these are the same people that with the whole COVID situation, they are just always on the wrong side of everything.
Yep.
So yeah,
actually, I'm with. Well, I think they're employed. I think somebody pays them. I think they're deliberately paid or incentivized to do what they're doing. That's the only thing that makes sense to me anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so
you never meet them in the real world.
Okay, go ahead.
You never meet them in the real world. They're never real people.
Oh, no.
That was on the.
No. Yeah.
It's just.
Okay, I want to move on to the ozone. And here's the deal about your ozone.
Yes.
So I try to tell everybody this because this happens a lot on Twitter. An ozone machine back in the 90s was an air purifying machine. So people were putting them in their houses. That should have never happened because you should not breathe it. But so if I talk about ozone, or if you say, hey, I have a little machine, we have to identify what makes a medical ozone machine. So it has to be a machine that can be hooked up to oxygen. There has to be an oxygen port, and it has to mix to become O3. If you're just cleaning your vegetables and you're making water because you're just cleaning water and you're running just the ozone through it, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, that's important to know. So it was Nikola Tesla, the original one, not this Tesla guy. Anyway, he was the first one that really came up with the generators, and I appreciate his style of generator, and there's different types. And when I first started over 20 years ago using ozone, I used a Corona discharge. That's the type of generator that makes ozone. Okay, that's medical ozone. And many doctors were using it at the time, and I thought this was the one. The problem with Corona discharge machines is that they need to have a fan on the machine. The ozone and the oxygen are hooked together. You make the ozone, but because of these Corona discharge machines, it gets hot. So they have, because it's usually made in a glass tube. They're causing the spark to make the ozone, and now they've got to have fans on the machine because it gets hot in there, and they've got to make sure that they're keeping the air circulation. And because of this, your production of ozone, and I was using it 6, 7, 8 times a day, is shrinking. So Nikola Tesla came up with a cold plasma machine. It's just like it sounds. It makes ozone, but it's cold. You don't need a fan on your machine. You don't need anything like that. You're going to be you can make it all day long and leave your machine. In fact, I left my machine on once for 4 days and it didn't hot. I just forgot to turn it off. So it's a way better machine. So if anyone out there is interested in looking into ozone, look at the cold plasma machines. You can find many companies now are selling those. And so you have a cold plasma machine, then you're going to have an actual attachment to an oxygen source. So for instance, if I'm using my sauna, my ozone sauna, my head is out because I don't want to smell the ozone. I've got a towel around my neck. My entire body is in a hard cabinet. And the steam is inside. The steam starts opening up my pores. I have the ozone and oxygen on, and it goes inside my pores right into the bloodstream. That's the idea. And just like Mark Serkis, who you had on, he really promotes transdermal magnesium, which I promote. Transdermal, in my opinion, is far better than trying to take any of it by mouth. So the same idea with transdermal magnesium, you're bringing it in through the skin. It's getting directly into the blood. Your body utilizes it immediately. It doesn't have to go through any breaking down. It doesn't have to go through any supplements. You know, a lot of times with magnesium, you're going to have loose stools. You don't have any of this problem. So same thing with ozone. The most wonderful way for people is to bring it in through the body. Now, if you had a lump, we might put a funnel over the lump and then have the ozone be directed only at that. They also do body bagging, where if you had something on your arm, a bad rash, they'd put a bag over the entire arm, and then they insert the oxygen in the ozone tubing, and the whole arm gets inundated, you know, with O3. So the whole idea with ozone is bringing it to the area that really needs it. When I got my sauna 20 years ago, I had breast cancer, and I was not going to do chemo, and I was not going to do radiation. Though in those days I did a lumpectomy, I don't know that I would do that today. I did do it then. So I just had the lump removed. And so as soon as they did that, my very first step afterwards was to get in that sauna, the ozone sauna, you know, surrounding, I did it twice a day for months, just kept the oxygen and the ozone coming in. And basically you always hear this expression that cancer can't grow in an oxygen-rich environment. Everybody says that, right? But they never break it down to really understandable components, because really, what does that mean? So what do? Run outside and just breathe a bunch of air, you know, because it doesn't grow in an oxygen, or do I go sit in a hyperbaric chamber? Like maybe I'll just go be in an oxygen chamber and that'll do it. So the difference is, there's a lot of books out there, but you can find differences with hyperbaric chambers and just oxygen versus O3 ozone. So Dr. Robert Rowan, Dr. Frank Schallenberger, they're all online, they're all on YouTube. You can find them all, anybody can, and they go over this. So really what you're really looking at with just pure oxygen is very beneficial for the body. We've heard of so many great things, but at the levels that ozone is antiviral, antiparasitic, and antibacterial, oxygen by itself does not have those qualities. When you're making O3 and you have the activated oxygen, so it's not just O2 anymore, you've added this extra atom, which is the ozone, to it. Now, anything that shouldn't be there is gone. I mean, fungus hates it. Think where fungus grows in your shower. It grows in a damp environment that's dark. What's ozone? The brightest light of the lights. It's going to come through the body. If it's combined with UV therapy as well, it's even more powerful. And it's gone. And earlier I was going to try and tell you this, that I didn't respond well. So like lots of people will say, oh, I have a fungal problem, and they'll take some antifungals and they get better. I didn't respond to any of that. I was pretty colonized with my whole body. I had a lot of fungal overgrowth, and it was throughout my entire body, and they didn't know what to do about me. They were, you know, you're pretty advanced. We don't know how to kill it with pills, because every time I take the pills, I get sick. So when I got my ozone equipment, it was only for me. I didn't give it to other people. I was just doing it for me. I only knew about autohemotherapy, which you probably know about and everyone knows about. And you go to a doctor's office, they take your blood out, they run it through ozone, they put it back into the blood, right? It's called the 10 pass. They do it now all the time. But the problem with that is it's cost prohibitive. I couldn't afford to do that. Hundreds and hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, to do the amount that I would have to do. So I went to the classes with Dr. Schallenberger. I started learning all the different ways to take ozone, there's many ways. But for most people, they'd have to buy their own equipment. So the equipment cost me, back in those days, maybe I spent, before I got the sauna, I think I spent $3,000 or $4,000. And it was a lot because I didn't have any money, but I had good credit. I did everything on credit. So when people say that to me, well, I just have no money. I'm like, shut up. Do you want to get well? Like I ask everybody, what is your problem? Like, I don't get it. So I went out, I bought everything, I stuck it in my house, and I thought, how am I going to do it now? So you can take it rectally. Women can take it vaginally. You can put it in your ears. And so, by the way, a lot of sinus problems are fungal. Even the Mayo Clinic in 1989 came out with a big thing online saying that sinusitis is fungal. It's not bacterial. Don't give them the antibiotics, right? So you can put the ozone right in the ears, right in the ear canal. You can do direct IV, which many HIV positive people in the 80s and 90s, you can find them all over YouTube. They weren't doing autohemotherapy where they were taking the blood out, running it through the blood and putting it back in. They were just taking the oxygen and the ozone together, O3, in an actual syringe, and they were injecting it. And some doctors still do it. So that's a doable thing. And people get freaked out, but it's Actually, you get the most ozone that way, because the problem with autohemotherapy is they add heparin and different, muscle or blood thinners. So, and that breaks down your ozone. So really, people doing direct IV, it's wonderful if you have good veins. If you don't have really good veins, you're probably going to have to do it either rectally. That's a whole other thing. So I went to the World Ozone Congress. It was held in Vegas, and it was all doctors from all over the world talking about ozone. It's absolutely amazing thing that I went to. It was also dentists there. It was everybody. It was hundreds of people. And so they had, at that time that I went, what's his name? Cuba. Who is the Cuban leader dude, the guy that died? I can't think of his name. The good grief. Everybody's saying Justin Trudeau. Yeah. Anyway, at the time I went to this Congress, his physician was there. Dr. Celia Mendez, I think is her name. You can find her online. And so here she is at this conference, and I'm in the very front row, man. And I am going to hear every word she says. I want to learn everything. So, she was showing slides. And so she's talking about the fact that they couldn't give direct IV to a lot of people who had cancer and all kinds of problems because their veins weren't good. And so she starts talking about giving them rectal ozone, rectally. And she starts showing anatomy of the colon and all the blood vessels attached. And I'm watching this going, of course, right? So, of course, I'm in the first row and I'm asking a million questions because I'm a colon therapist. I want to know about this. So I say, well, what if they're impacted, or what if they're really, what if they're super constipated? What happens then when you're trying to bring rectal ozone in? And she said, she showed all her test results. She said it didn't even matter. Even if they were full of waste and they were really sick, bringing it in rectally was the premier way of taking ozone over there in Cuba. That's what they did. So they gave up on, go ahead.
Are you talking about ozone water?
Well,
going up there, right?
Yeah, so you can either bring the gas. You can bring the gas directly in.
Okay.
But a lot of people will run it through what's called a humidifier. So you've got water, and then they bring the gas through the humidifier, and then it will come through the catheter into the rectum, just like that. Or you can bubble water. You can bubble ozone water, immediately put it into your bag for an enema, and immediately take it. Yes, you can do that. The beauty of taking it, the way that she was doing it over there in Cuba, was they were actually attaching a small catheter, but you're only doing 2 to 3 minutes. Maximum in the rectum is only 2 minutes, if that. You're not going very long. Like women can do vaginal insufflations for up to 40 minutes. It's not a problem. It's going to go through their lymph system. But when you're doing the rectum, you have to be careful because it's hot. It's a gas. It's hot. But for most people, they can handle just little amounts. But she was just talking about the efficacy of coming rectally, which nobody would think of. Now, again, I want to encourage people, if you have your own equipment, you now are open to knowing all the things you can do. I mean, it changes everything. And when people ask me how I got well, and I tell them, look, there's a lot of adjunctive therapies I did. But when I had my own equipment, I'm now able to take ozone, 4 days out of 7. I'm able to regularly do it in my house. I can bubble water and drink it every day. There were things I could do, and I was doing them really consistent, right? So if you understand that I was bedridden for about 2.5 years, and after about 18 months of ozone and cleaning up my bowels and everything, I was riding around on motorcycles. I mean, I was just hanging out with people. I was telling everybody, I think I'm healed. I couldn't believe it. I mean, another thing, 2 of the antidepressants I came off, one of them is called Effexor. If you go onto any website about Effexor, most people can't get off it. It's just really not only addictive, but it gives you these zaps in your brain after you're trying to get off it. And they call it this synapse thing. And I couldn't get rid of that. And when I started using ozone, everything was gone. All of my problems, I have to keep telling people how severe I was. I was very severe. I had thoracic outlet syndrome, they said. So they took a rib out of me. They said I had that. I had all these nodules in my throat, and they cut them all out. And I mean, I had pain shots into my back. I mean, all these things for years. And believe it or not, a lot of the so-called therapies they gave me really debilitated me further because my liver had to deal with all this crap. The fact and the way that ozone healed me, by the way, You know, ozone means breath of God, the interpretation of the word.
Wow.
I find that fascinating because they'll try and tell you how evil it is, and it's all poison, and it's just you're breathing the ozone. What else are we hearing about like this these days? Everything in the world is going to kill you. You know, it's like they're like, oh, this carbon, this has got to be the carbon. I'm like, well, do you want to live and breathe? I mean, I don't understand people. So ozone is necessary. Ozone is needed. And people say, yeah, but it creates free radicals. Okay. Do you go to the gym every day? Because every day that you go to the gym, you're creating free radicals. And all these antioxidants you take, yeah, everyone loves their antioxidants. I don't take any, not very many at all. I mean, I'm not really big on antioxidants at all. I feel like just eating really, I just always say real food, food that's grown. And I have to say one more thing. If you are compromised with yeast, no fruit. Everybody wants to eat. Yeah, but it's natural. Yeah, but you're living on fructose all day and all night. Plus, all our fruit has been hybridized up the yin yang, and it's not even what people think it is. So, you know, you have to really just look at things. My body does super, super well on animal fat and animal meat. Super well. My brain is on just straight up on that. But again, you know, going back to your gut, if you were having the problems you were having, it may not have been only the carnivore diet. It could be that you have something going on with your gut that you want to get to the root cause and your root problem, right?
Yeah. Well, I lived in a moldy house.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. And I also took a vaccine. Stupidly, I went traveling to India and I took a typhoid vaccine.
Yeah.
And that, I've spoke about it in so many episodes now. That's where it all started to go for me. But all of the things that I've you know, all of the people I've talked to on, you know, this podcast so far, they all specialize in things that I've looked into and tried.
Yep.
So that's how I've got quite a broad, you know, knowledge base of like different people and different topics, because I've kind of been all around the houses trying to fix things. But yeah, the vaccine was the first one. Then I went on the carnivore after that, and then the moldy house. You know, I got into the whole stress thing, and Dr. John Sarno, TMS, went down the German new medicine route. That's interesting. But I've looked a lot into ozone as well. That's, you know, I'm really happy to have this conversation. But I did buy a cheap machine. It's one of those ones with like two little toggly things with the balls like stones, and it makes ozone water. I've been drinking the water. To be honest with you, when I drink it, I get like a massive burst of energy.
Yeah.
So it feels great. Yeah. Would you recommend those machines at all, or would you say throw it in the bin and spend some money and get a proper one?
I really believe the right machine is everything. I really do. Yeah. I think you should invest in the right thing. I want to tell you one more thing. I haven't gotten into at this point the qualities of ozone and what it's all used for, but I want to encourage you about something. One of the things that ozone does is it stops the cortisol and the adrenaline response. So a lot of times people's steroidal pathways, the entire pathway, is out of whack. And it sounds like, you know, when you were saying you had a lot of stress and you were trying to do breathing and you know, a lot of people will do a lot of those things, but it's usually the gut, and then using ozone will literally start resetting your steroidal pathway. That's why I love ozone. I mean, I have women I've worked with where they've been on the pill for 7 years. They get married. Now they're trying to have kids. They cannot have children. You start putting them in an ozone sauna regularly, even just once a week, and all of a sudden their steroidal pathways reset. The fungal component is blasted out by the ozone, and they get pregnant. And it's happened so many times now. I'm not saying, okay, everybody out there, like 100,000%, but all the ones that I've worked with and they get on an antifungal diet, and we work with the antifungals, almost always the ozone clears it right up. So the thing about the stress right away, just because I do this, I'm listening to you, my little antennas, because I'm thinking that anxiety stress thing that keeps, gut, and as we just said to each other, everybody does that. How is your gut? So how do we break that down, and why? And really, one of the biggest problems when yeast gets a hold of you, even if you've radically changed your diet, you've been on a new diet for 2 years, is it's already in your tissues. It's already in your steroidal pathways, and it's already in there because it's a counterfeiter, and it will replace your hormones and your body's. It likes to steal in there. It likes to steal. That's food for it. So I tell people, when you start using ozone really regularly, it's going to start normalizing your steroidal pathways. One of the things I want to say quickly about dealing with fungal overgrowth in the body, because I have a methodology about all of it, it colonizes the colon completely. So you got 5 feet of colon, fungal overgrowth will colonize there. Why? Because that is the root where the waste is. It's also where you make probiotics, where your body assimilates your food. It loves that area, okay? Does it live in the small intestine, the upper 23 feet? Yes, that's called SIFO, small intestine fungal overgrowth. It's called SIBO when it's bacterial overgrowth, and that can be H. pylori and other things. And usually you do a breath test for methane for that, but they never talk ever about SIFO. So how, with methodology, would you deal with the fungal overgrowth? Because really it's from your tongue, 30 feet, mouth to anus. So how are you going to do that?
Yeah.
If you pop a pill, that's going to go to your liver, it's going to break down, and then it's going to go out, just disseminate into the bloodstream. But that's not the breeding grounds. Breeding grounds are in the colon. Now you're going to know why I do colonics and enemas and why I promote at this level. Because once it's colonized, and that is all the way down through the esophageal area, all the way down through your colon, you have to have a method of how you're going to kill the yeast and how you're going to work with it. So just over the years of doing colonics, I started putting antifungals in inside so I have a certain kind of fiber I'll use, and like people know, you could use psyllium husk, you could use slippery elm powder, you could use varying types of fiber as your carrier, as your binder, you know, and maybe use a little bit of liquid bentonite as a binder. I don't personally like to use dried powder, so I don't use a lot of charcoal, and I don't use dried bentonite because your body has to convert it. So what I want to do is have that binder already ready to go. So I take my fiber, I take the liquid bentonite, I put everything in a bit of water in a shaker. Now I'm going to take my liquid antifungal, my liquid antimicrobial. I'm going to put it in that drink mix. I'm going to shake it. I'm going to immediately drink it before it gets thick. Now it's going to work from the throat all the way. 23 feet of small intestine, 5 feet of bowel. And what are we going to do over time? We're going to rotate through different liquid antifungals. I might suggest 6, but there's hundreds of them. I mean, there's so many great antifungals. So you're going to start putting that, but you got this carrier, this binder. So not only are you killing the yeast, now you're going to actually pull it out of the body. That's the point. And and sometimes when people have really bad overgrowth, they'll say, I'm doing the fiber drink, I'm rotating my antifungals because we know that fungus is pleomorphic and it rotates strains so it can survive. So we must rotate our killers, but they'll take it and they'll say, I'm not pooping at all. Like, I'm doing everything right. I'm just not pooping. So then I'm like, okay, we're going to do some enemas or colonics, whatever you can afford to do. And I'm going to teach them how to use those to get that out. You've got to get it out of the body. And then it's just like going down to the ocean with a cup. You're going to start, you're going to feel a little better. Yeah. Now we got to do it long enough that your body is going to start shifting. And now you're going to start feeling different. And now when you eat that carnivore or you eat these other diets and everything, we got a different, your body's assimilating, your body's eliminating, you're in a different place, and it does change you. It's a big deal. I mean, I utilize castor oil packs. I do a lot of work with magnesium, which I think you first contacted me about magnesium because I talk about it all the time.
Spoke about it. We've not even spoke about it.
Well, the thing about magnesium that I found out, because I keep telling everybody how sick I was, I didn't have any magnesium in my body. I didn't realize in those early years how depleted I was. So people don't understand that you cannot detoxify. Your body can't detoxify anything without sufficient magnesium. It is a component of every part of the detoxification process. So I would start to try to detoxify, and my body would shut down. That's how sick I was. And nobody knew about, in those days, told me about magnesium. And so I was so severely deficient that when I started getting well and I started being sufficient, oh my goodness, it's like night and day. I mean, I didn't have to be on all the drugs they put you on for all these things. They were gone. It was truly a miracle. So get the book, The Magnesium Miracle by Dr. Carolyn Dean, or get Transdermal Magnesium by Dr. Mark Serkis, both of them.
Yeah, we love magnesium. But they say it can take up to a year before your levels are
8 months. 8 months.
Yeah,
for me.
we spray.
And on top of it, by the way, it'll bring up your DHEA for men. I tell men all the time, you think that you need to have more tea, and you're going to take all these injections, which are all problematic. If you go to the gym and you sweat, or you're sweating because you're outside and you're hot, put some magnesium cream all over you. I have a magnesium cream with the recipe on my YouTube channel. It's made with beef tallow as a base. So what you're going to do is keep it on the skin. Now you're going to be increasing your magnesium through the skin. Every time you go to the gym, you put it on, right? Your DHEA is going to start to rise. A couple points. Dr. Circus in his book goes through all the ways that DHEA causes testosterone and different hormones to rise, and it will start putting your hormones back into complete.
Yeah, we love it. First thing in the morning, and then when I go to the gym, I'll spray it exactly on the muscles that I've worked. And then before I go to bed, it is honestly the best. But it started off for me, it was expensive. I was buying the capsules from Clive de Cole. That was expensive. They're really good, but it's expensive. And then I bought some oil, which was like 30-40 £40. Lasted me about 6 months. And then I learned how to make it myself, which cost about £3. And it lasted about 6 months.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
Well, a lot of people can't take the oil, so I want to put a little plug in here. If you can't take the oil, for very many reasons, some especially women will get rashes from it. I usually tell them once they get sufficient, the rashes will go away, but they don't want to go through that, right? So we usually start with the creams and then we work into the oil, but I still have people who can't do the oil. It just doesn't work for them. So using it as a cream also works.
Yeah. What was we talking about? So with the ozone, right? So I've got these questions in the back of my mind. With the ozone, I know they mention about breathing it in. So when you're using the actual the gas, essentially, you mentioned that you're covering, it's covering your body. You've got a towel. How dangerous is it to breathe it in directly?
Well, I've been doing this 20 years, and I probably accidentally get it in my nostrils, and I get it almost every day. It will do damage to the mucoidal membranes of the nostrils and the eyes. It'll burn, and you'll just get this terrible burn, and you'll have to go outside and try and get. Could it do real severe damage if you kept doing it? Probably. I always have a fan. If I'm making the water, I put a fan on the water. I always open the windows. I always have the windows open with fans running. So I try to always make sure that if it's going to be in the room, that I let the room move the air out all the time.
Yeah. Another question. So some people use it when they have mold spores in their house.
Right.
But I've heard others say that what it does is it essentially it makes the mold spores explode, which can actually make it more toxic. Is that true, or?
It can be true. So it's all depending, first of all, the type of mold you have, the level of mold you have. And people have to understand that it's usually a process. Like if you talk to a professional person, they're going to do the process. They're going to let it sit a certain amount of time. But you have people doing it themselves, and they're just running it through there for an hour, and then they come back in and they think, that's enough. So I think you have to be a little bit more careful on the way you do it, how long you're letting the ozone stay in there. Like if I run it in my house, I take all my animals out, all the windows are closed, I'm running it in here. You can turn your bed, take your mattresses, open them up. It destroys mites, it destroys bed bugs, it destroys anything. It's wonderful. So people I know do that regularly. The casinos here, Southern California has a lot of gambling casinos at the Indian reservations, and they have a smoking side and a non-smoking side, and the non-smoking side is cleaned with ozone. That's how they're doing it. There's been in the last 5 years an outbreak of a certain fungus called Candida auris, A-U-R-I-S, in all the hospitals, and I'm trying to warn people about it because it's pretty bad fungal. And there's one type of hospital called the Loma Linda branch of hospitals, and they're running ozone now through in the hospitals, they're running the ozone, which is killing the Candida auris. And I'm like, see, but they won't. Back in the 80s when we knew first about AIDS, all they had to do with the blood that's going to be transfusion blood is to run the ozone through the blood. And they did it in Europe, and people did not get bad blood. And you can use the ozone for that as well, but they would not do it in America, which I still to this day do not understand. Los Angeles uses it to clean their water. So it's a potent thing. It's a powerful thing. knowing how to use it in the varying different ways of doing it. If I was doing my house, like you're saying, and it causes all the spores to explode, I would want to talk to a professional and see what they say, because how are, the timing of that might be important.
Yeah. We had a professional remediation in the end, because we were having all sorts of issues. I do wonder, do you know much about black mold, so aspergillus or penicillin, and that being linked with cancers? Because that's something that people are starting to talk about now.
That's what is that stuff they were adding to all the foods? It's called citric
acid.
Yeah, that's citric acid. I think they're making it even from aspergillus. I'm pretty sure that's what's in it. That whole subject of the cancer and fungus. There was a man, Dr. Simoncelli, I think it was Simoncelli, and he used to be on YouTube, and I don't know if they took it off. He was out of Italy, and this was the mid-90s, who discovered that breast cancer. He actually had a video where he showed breast cancer in women, and they opened it up, and it was all fungus. It was all this white, thick fungus. And if he's still on there, I mean, they shut him down so fast. He was doing the same thing. He was.
Hulda Clark was the same. She's a fellow Canadian. Hulda Clark, she was talking about the same stuff.
Yep.
Do you know much about her?
Yes, she just passed away a few years ago. Well, to me, a few years ago. It's probably longer, but yeah, she had that book, The Cure for Cancer, and they took her to court because of the title. Because you're not allowed.
But then she died of cancer.
You're not allowed to.
She died of cancer.
You can't cure it.
The thing is, she apparently died of cancer. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if anyone's looked into it, but that's one. These lefties are like, that's the got you moment.
Well, they did that with Atkins. They did that with the Atkins diet. They were like, oh, he died from his diet. Well, he fell over and banged his head, I think, what happened to him. But they're always going to do that. And by the way, all those people are on all of our Twitter pages. They know everything. They come in there. Oh, don't you know?
Yeah. No, there's definitely something in this. Hulda Clark was saying that once you get into a tumor, essentially, fungal pathogens, parasites, normally toxins as well. So, and this is why I got Mark on, because he comes at it from a very different perspective. He's not a scientist, but he's very scientific.
Yes.
He doesn't come at it from, say, your perspective, where you've lived in the real world of fixing your own health in that sense, and then you've sort of come to this conclusion through that. I mean, he does have a cancer story that sort of led him down that path, but he really went into the literature, and he's very much studying all of the actual, I guess, the mainstream sort of academia, essentially, and then he's found these, gaps and holes, and essentially it's led him to the very same conclusion as about 4 or 5 people that even I've interviewed on this show. So it shows that it is out there, but the problem is it's so hidden and unwell known. If people do end up with a diagnosis, they don't know where to start. They've got no idea. So as long as it's suppressed in terms of not even the mainstream, it's even suppressed in the alternative stream,
Totally.
And these people have got they've got nowhere to find this information unless they're willing to change their life. And actually, do you know one thing? And maybe this could be a good place to stop. I know I've had you for an hour and 40 minutes now.
Okay.
This is a message that comes up quite a lot in this show, and I've said this many times, and I've actually had other guests that have said it back to me as well. And I think your story is just a perfect example of this. And when you're met with like a horrendous diagnosis, right, or even like a debilitating chronic illness, essentially, let's go with like a bad diagnosis. Essentially, what that is it really is the death of the old person that you was, right, and essentially the beginning of a new. Whether you accept that you're going to die and that is the end of it, so essentially that is the death of the old person, or you're willing to kind of have like a rebirth and a shed the old, not even so much personality, but the old lifestyle, the old belief system. And then you're kind of embarking on this new journey, which in many cases, someone like you, for instance, all those years ago, you probably didn't even know what any of these things that you're studying and teaching and helping people with now. You probably didn't even know what they are.
No.
So it's almost like this tragedy, this traumatic experience has kind of forced you to, say goodbye to the old and to go on this journey, this thing that you never would have done if you didn't go through that kind of traumatic experience.
Absolutely.
So there's almost something quite beautiful there, if that makes sense. I've kind of butchered the whole way I've explained it, but that's kind of the point. And is, oh, sorry.
Perfect. You said it perfectly. I do believe it's everything. It's spiritual, it's physical, it's emotional. The way that you look at life. It's not just that you're thankful that you have your health back. You have completely shifted. And like you're saying, I didn't know that was going to happen. I was so desperate. I was so incredibly desperate. I knew that I was dying. And, in my case, a lot of people will talk about like one thing. You see it a lot on social media. They'll go, oh, it's methylene blue, or it's you see the one thing. It's always the one, take ivermectin for everything. And I'm not saying those things don't work. That's not the point. But lots of people don't have their organs working. What if their colon isn't working? What if their liver isn't working? What if they don't have a lymph system that's like, there's more to it usually than just taking a pill. And that's why I tell people I'm a functional nutritionist. I don't work with how much vitamin C is in a red pepper. I don't care. I'm trying to figure out if are your systems working? Are they? And then you come back to what you're talking about. And I think when people are really ill and they get well, all of their systems, plural, start to kick in again. And you don't know that you weren't operating. Everything wasn't operating. And all of a sudden you can see things. And all of a sudden, I remember back then, all the anxiety, I just was full of anxiety all the time. And just to not even have that, that's a huge thing, by the way. I'm not belittling it, but to not have it, I still just, it's amazing. It's just amazing. Yeah. But I understand people that have it, and panic attacks, I had them so bad. I didn't even know. I could be standing anywhere and they could happen. So you just don't go out then. You just don't go anywhere because you just never know. And so your life is ruled by this. But when you start getting well, you start realizing also the things that have been holding you back long before you got sick. And you have to let so much of that go. When I teach in the school districts here, and most of the time it's to Spanish-speaking people, so I have a translator. And I talk fast, as you can tell. And so I have to always wait for the translator. I'm always waiting for her to catch up with me, right? And after, I've been there 12 years now. And so every new year, I like to say to the new class, hey, how many people from last year? And, you get some hands up. And I go, and these are the parents, by the way, not kids. These are all parents. These are adults. And then I'll ask them, okay, how many have been coming for years, and you get their hand. And then I ask this one question. And this is the one thing you can end this on, because this is to every person that might see this or listen. I ask the same question every year. What have you done about what you learned? Anybody? Those women, those people that come to my classes for 12 years, they get binders full of all my PowerPoints. We've gone through everything for years. There's still people sitting in that class who are sick, who are on prescription drugs, who have never done one thing. Not one thing. But they'll tell you all about health. They're all these, they collect knowledge. And I don't care. I don't even care if they hate me. I always say to them, I'm going to tell you the truth. But until you actually do it, there's nothing I can do for you. Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
So when you say everyone says that there's that one thing, and the one thing really is, are you going to change?
Are you going to change? Are you going to apply anything? Because you can know everything in the world about health. The hardest people I work with are people who know a lot about health. It's truly the hardest people to work with. They know everything. And so at the end of it, I just end up saying to them, look, number one, do you want to work with me? Because you don't have to, because I don't want to be the boss of you. The last thing I want to be is someone's boss. Like, I'll be your coach, I'll work with you, and I'll teach you. But if you're not willing to do it, then what are we doing here? And so we come down to always the will of the person. What do you want? If it's always going to be someone to do something to you, for a doctor to do something to you, to give you a drug, to give you a surgery, even for alternative health people to do something to you, you're never going to get it. You're never going to get it.
Nah, that's a good place to leave it. Brilliant. That's really
All
good.
right.
What do you want to quickly shout out your website, your YouTube? I'll share it in the link anyway, but
Yeah, what if I just, okay, my website is nethersprings.com, Nether, Nether Springs, one word, .com. It's mostly, though, I have to tell you, it's mostly for local people. I mean, I got a place, I do colonics, I do everything. So you're not going to find a lot of my stuff there. You're going to see it on my YouTube channel, which I can't rattle off other than it's Nether Springs Health Coaching, I think is what it is, but I'll send you the link and you can put it under there. And I've got a Substack. I'll send you both of those. And those are more where what we talked about today, I'm starting to go over all of it. Methodology, how to put things together. Now, obviously, everyone's an individual, but if you have a methodology of how you need to get well, and it's usually going to take in diet, lifestyle, adjunctive therapies, and then what you're going to use for your inside stuff to do the work, like the antimicrobials, etc. All of these are ways that you combine to get well. I've rarely seen anybody get well without having all their systems open, depending how sick they are, right? So I combine all the aspects of getting well, not just your diet, right?
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.